recording. Excellent. All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Aspiration, and I'm one of the co-directors for the InfUr Hub, so the Informal Urbanism Research Hub, with Kim Dovey and Australin and Patrick Kobanoff. And before we begin, I just want to quickly acknowledge that we're meeting today on the lands of the Wurrung and Boiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And recognize the important research of Indigenous knowledges in the Academy, and that here we are in Victoria where there's now a treaty, and I look forward to seeing what that means for us in terms of our practice, research, and teaching. So lots of new learnings to come ahead. It is my great pleasure to welcome Tooran here, who is a collaborator of mine, but has also over time become a friend, a dear friend. So I'm really excited to be hosting her today, traveling all the way from the University of Sydney. Doesn't sound too far, but you did get onto an airplane to be here.
Yes,
that's
a delayed one actually.
So pretty significant effort. So how it works is Tooran will speak for about 40 minutes. I'll let you know if you're kind of going a little bit too long. And then we'll have a conversation, about 20 minutes. And then if you're interested, we'll decamp to the Clyde, which is our tradition. This is the last InfUr seminar of the year. So we're really delighted to have you. So Tooran, you're going to be talking to us in search of a South-to-South dialogue from smart urbanism to infrastructural repression / aspiration. Interested to know what role that / is doing in that title.
There.
All right, Tooran, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you for making it to this November seminar. And please allow me to also acknowledge that we are on First Nations land. The fact that Victoria is the first state to have a treaty is wonderful. I hope that the rest of the country can follow suit very soon. And thank you, Crystal, for the invitation, and thank you to everyone else involved with Informal Urbanism Research Hub to giving me this space. So you may wonder, okay, why am I in search of a South-to-South dialogue, considering that I am based in Australia and I've been living in Australia for almost 20 years. Australia is in a quite interesting position as it is one of the very few countries in the Southern Hemisphere that is technically categorized as part of the global North. And yet, if you look at those red dot points, we are pretty much in a global South neighborhood, which makes our positioning quite interesting. Some of you already know that despite living in Australia for almost 2 decades, that is where I was born, raised, educated, and practiced as a built environment professional in Iran. And even more recently, most of my research in the last 10 years was focused in India. What some of you may not have realized is that, especially in recent times, these are all of the locations that my research have taken me to, and I've been able to gather data in different volumes from many of these locations. One thing that is clear is that the most majority of them are in the red part of the map, the so-called global South, or global majority, as it is now more fondly called. However, I'm the first one to make it clear that when it comes to my work, I use a Southern urban critic, defining South not merely based on geographies, a random map that I have found off the internet, but as power relations that have long been used to sideline and silence. Yet, I'm very aware that when it comes to our broader field of studies, urban studies, we have an issue around North centrism. The largest, most complex cities of our time are now mostly located in the global South. And yet, most of what we know persistently comes from a handful of cities in the global North. And for that reason, while I don't limit myself to geography, I keep this map just as a guideline, as I'm doing everything in my power to pivot against that bias. while acknowledging that pockets of South can exist anywhere that we live in, regardless of what color the map might be here. So with that introduction, you shouldn't be surprised to know that, you shouldn't be surprised to know that I usually tell people that I have a soft spot for the South in my research. And I've been in search of a South-to-South dialogue my entire research basically career. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey about this search that is still ongoing, acknowledging that I've been research active for almost 20 years. That's how old I am. And it will take more than 40 minutes to run you through 20 minutes. So the narration that I have today is a selective narration, just to make a storyline. And I choose to start that selective narration in India. As I noted before, a big chunk of my research over the last 10 years has focused on urbanization in India, and most specifically smart city development in India. I've been lucky enough to do empirical work in a long list of cities in India. In some of them, my work extended over a number of years, a number of field work over multiple fundings, and in others, I had what you can call a snap empirical work. If I had to offer a summary of what I have learned in all of these years, I like to use COVID as a point of reference. Basically, in pre-COVID years, I can say that in the collaborative work that I did, my first perhaps inclination was to figure out the ins and outs of the official narrations around the smart cities. Not limited, but mostly focused on their smart cities mission in India. And in that line of work, I started by an investigation of multi-scalar governance of smart cities in India, in which my work, alongside a few others, showed that there was a reduction of elected power within the limited scope of the smart cities mission. I also paid a specific attention in my work to the place outcome of a smart city development, with a focus around the questions of informality. The work is already published. I am not going to spend too much time on the details of these years. But what I can tell you is that, especially in the very first year of COVID, I was lucky enough to be busy with a research fellowship that provided me the space and the time to write up this book, Global Trends of Smart Cities. This book provided an integrated analysis of 135 cities in their smartification journeys. And without going to the details of the analysis, and at the risk of oversimplification, I can say that the biggest lesson for me was that geography, in the form of the north-south divide, is the most influential factor shaping smart city development worldwide. And that's a guiding light that informs my research all the way to today. So with this takeaway message, then it comes the phase 2 of today's narration, which is mostly around my ARC Future Fellowship. I was lucky enough to secure one of those rare, now to be soon distinguished, ARC Future Fellowship schemes, and it started in January 2022, which basically means that I am now in the final months of my Future Fellowship, here with you guys, sharing what I have learned. In the Future Fellowship journey, I started with an attempt to articulate a distinguished line of inquiry around Southern smart urbanism, based on initially the existing literature. And soon I realized that that concept could be articulated around a few main propositions around bottom-up, right-based rather than top-down normative visioning, around leapfrogging rather than retrofitting non-existing infrastructure, and with an emphasis on collective society and community rather than individual smart citizens. For those who are familiar with the North-centric definition of smart cities, these are very different from the official narrations in the North, and allowed me to develop a theoretical framework around focused on the right to the smart city in the global South. In this framework, I have three pillars of expose, propose, and politicize. To expose as into identify who's excluded, who's dismissed, who's displaced, whose dispositions with the smart city planning and narrations. Propose as into learn actually from the alternative notions of a smart city actually existing and led by those most affected by the neoliberal smart city agenda. And finally, politicize in the sense of acknowledging and accounting for the political cost of what has been exposed and what has been proposed. So again, these are all well articulated in my published work. And now in the final months of my future fellowship, I can tell you that the biggest learning experience for me was a turn towards an intersectional feminist take on the subject. This take is obviously informed by the existing literature around gender, the smart cities, around intersectionality, around bottom-up, grassroots, insurgent, rebel, alternative, all of these adjectives that come before planning. And yet, if I had to give you a more tangible narrations that comes out of my work, I surprisingly came across an unexpected number of women in my work in India, at the margins and against a smart city and broader digital geographies. And this is something that I hadn't planned for, because first of all, smart urbanism, digital sectors worldwide are male-oriented sectors. So that came as a surprise to me. And as you can see, I have listed some of them, as much as I had the space for, and some of the initiatives and the alternative initiatives that they were part of. Just some takeaway messages, because again, I've written on these, and the work have very recently come out on this intersectional feminist take, is that the individual women in the smart city discourse are the exceptions. As I said, in minority, in male-dominated, sectors, but they mostly come from privileged backgrounds, high caste, wealthy, and yet the women at the margins of a smart city discourse are about collective challenges. And just bear in mind that I just articulate that Southern smart urbanism, when collective was a big part of it, they're very much entangled with civil societies, and at times hopeful and usually impactful. I'm always in awe of the resistance of civil society in India, and I certainly witnessed that in these interactions. Part of their resilience comes from the fact that they're very pragmatic. They're very pragmatic. And this is then something that is different with the women who are against the smart city discourse. There's some similarities. They're also about collective challenges and opportunities. They're also very much entangled with civil society, and yet they use a variety of civic avenues to challenge, confront the loss of fundamental rights around some big questions, such as AI-enabled surveillance, such as digital policing. And again, for me, it was very informative to see that the question of caste remains core to the ongoing struggles in India, which once again is a reflection of more complex social stratifications in the global South, which basically reinforce the need to go beyond gender and definitely be intersectional. Okay, while doing and enjoying the future fellowship journey, I was lucky to secure a couple of parallel grants that gave me more resources to be able to travel to several parts of the global south to learn my sharings, but at the same time to hear and learn from their experiences and think about what comes next. Similarities are quite stark, and yet differences for me provide good learning foundations as intersectional voices in the face of technological advances and challenges are multimodal but only unfolding. So there's a lot of learning that all of us need to do. And this is what takes me to what might come next. And be kind to me because this is just next. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm very excited about it. So that's why I'm sharing with you guys some of my thinking. And this is that research agenda around the intersectional feminist take on the infrastructure of oppression versus inspiration or aspiration. And the reason that I have that slash in the title is that there are times that I am yet to be able to make a call if this is an infrastructure of oppression or aspiration. I don't want to, just jump the gun just yet. And while there are quite a few different things that I have my eyes on as exemplars of infrastructure of oppression versus inspiration, aspiration, one thing that I'm excited about, and I will tell you why, is actually the mushrooming of data centers in global majority. And data centers right now seems to be very, very hot topics. I don't know about Melbourne, but in New South Wales Parliament, there seems to be the topic of the day. And obviously in the federal parliament, we are hearing about data centers in Australia. But even before all of these, just about a year ago, I started paying attention to the growth of data centers initially in Africa, South Africa, but also a bit in Egypt. And more recently, South America, Brazil, but also Chile to a certain level. And data centers are fascinating to me as material infrastructure of digital. There are really multi-layered objects, very complex. Few private, powerful players are at play, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and a couple of more. And yet their spatial footprints is very diverse, urban, suburban, regional, they're everywhere. Their environmental footprints is something that is really boring. They're very energy hungry, and especially in the global south, in many cases, they are showing up in energy scarce contexts. The more that I learn about them, the more I'm amazed with the political economy of data center. I mean, I put the word bubble there, but I'm a bit worried about that because we hear about AI bubble, but my collaborators, some of them coming from engineering, having all of the technical skills that I perhaps lack, have assured me that they have no reason to think that data centers are going away anytime soon. They have no reason to even believe that they're going to get smaller anytime soon. If anything, all of the indications suggest that they're here to stay and they're here to only be bigger and bigger. In this area, there are a few things that are getting my attention. I will be talking about some of them, like First Nation voices and resistance, as I will be raising questions around whether they are new colonial infrastructure or whether they might be infrastructure of aspirations. And I'm not talking about employability. Whoever that tells you that they're going to be a gain with employability because of data center are bullshitting you. Because beyond construction, they don't employ anyone. Definitely not the local population. But data is the new oil, is the new gold. So if northern data is going to be stored, trusted in the southern land, would that open new, stronger positioning in terms of negotiation? That is where I am not sure if there will be inspiration, aspirational opportunities, and I'm open to learn more about this area. Anyway, the reason that I'm really excited and I decided to give you this specific example is that I was in South America just a few weeks ago and spent quite a bit of time, especially in Brazil. And in Brazil, I came across some wonderful, wonderful people, small sector of civil society in collaboration with journalists, academics, First Nation voices that are quite concerned about this topic. And the way that they define data centers as another productive frontier of capital, physical, tangible structure of cloud, that require enormous amount of energy to proceed. When they talk about the water usage to cool them down, the air conditioning, the energy use, the even mineral use behind them, and all of the questions that they raise, they make me very excited. I wanted to share my excitement with you. This is a tentative map of data centers in Brazil. So Sao Paulo currently has the largest number of them, but they are going well beyond the usual suspect, Sao and Rio. They are actually going to regional places, and they are the parts that they are facing a stronger resistance. What I have today is what I still call raw data. It's early days for me, but I'm going to share this raw data under three themes of greenwashing in energy transition, Brazilian law, and popular mobilization led by First Nation. Okay. So when it comes to greenwashing in energy transition, I have to give you a bit of context. Among the G20 economies, Brazil leads in renewable electricity share by a wide margin. In 2024, according to official data, approximately 90% of its electricity comes from low carbon sources. Yet, the country is experiencing a paradox of excess green energy, particularly from wind and solar, which is being wasted due to insufficient transmission infrastructure, a phenomenon known as curtailment. Within this context, the people that I engage with are really, really worried about what they describe as greenwashing or green makeup, as they believe that there is an attempt to associate data centers and to sell data centers as solutions of sustainability and environmental benefits. Especially, COP30 is happening, as we speak, and they are packaging data centers as part of the international negotiations, as a part of energy transition. And yet, the people that I met, some of them argue that this is not energy transition, it is grand energy transaction. And they talk about the fact that some of the no carbon emissions mission claims are only justified at the back of offset. And this is not something new. We have similar stories with how no carbon claims are made around at the back of offset claims, even unaccounted offset claims here in Australia. So this was actually one of the areas that some of the people that I met and engaged with made specific references to the strategic minerals that are needed and definitely are not renewable resources for the data centers to work. And the fact that this movement towards packaging business market-based opportunities as green solutions, as solutions for climate crisis are really dishonest. Another area of raw data is about Brazilian law. And again, here I need to give you two pieces of contextual information. The week before I arrived in Brazil, this is how hot the topic is. Just the week before I arrived in Brazil, a new law was passed. And basically, the federal government of Brazil issued an interim measure approving a special tax regime for data center services to encourage their installation, expansion, and modernization. And you can imagine the kind of hot environment that I entered less than a week after this new law. But there is a second piece of context that we need to bear in mind. Unlike Australia, Brazil is a signatory of Indigenous and Tribal People Convention. This is known as Convention 169, and I will come back to this. This is basically the major binding international convention concerning Indigenous people and tribal people, and a forerunner of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which is really important in the context of Brazil. It's a powerful tool that even in the past has been used to cancel mining approvals, to cancel major developments when First Nation and Indigenous people were impacted. So with this, basically two pieces of contextual background, some of the people that I engage with were talking about the fact that the new policies and the new rulings are not about regulating, they're only about attracting investment, and pointing out that the distinction really matters. And they were talking about the fact that even in the few months prior to the official announcement, when some level of, call it behind the scene rumors, going on, the civil society started submitting letters to the government, asking them to clarify what is it that Brazil is going to exactly get out of this deal, because they were arguing that we know what we are losing: tax revenue, land, water, energy. What is it that we are going to gain? And the official response that they had was just suggesting that it's earlier stages, calculations are not finite, so we cannot really give you any detailed answer, which is not really helpful, especially when the ruling and the policy change is already in place. And finally, the third line of raw data that I'm sharing with you guys now is about popular mobilization led by First Nation. And this is really close to my heart, is in line with some of the other piece of work that I've been doing here in Australia and really got my attention. And I will talk about this in more details as I saw a new level of energy within the civil society when they were talking about a first popular mobilization in Brazil against a data center led by Indigenous communities. And this basically was signing towards a different kind of opportunity. The argument was that the government is overexcited about arrival of data centers as new opportunities, but because they're only about, I mean, we have a number of them, but in regional cases at least, they're only about to enter, we actually have a golden opportunity to demand a strict regulation and accountability. They haven't lost the game yet. And especially First Nation activists with reference to previous experiences of territorial dispositions and environmental destruction, were very energized to lead basically this mobilization. A specific case that comes to mind, I hope that, okay, this location map is clear enough. Okay, maybe, okay, let's see if it allows me. My mouse is not really behaving, but anyway, you see that teeny tiny, yes, basically red shape there. That's the location map. So we are talking about that northern, northeastern corner of Brazil. And this is known as Serra Coastal Zone. It's home to 324 communities that self-identify as traditional, including some Indigenous people, including some Afro-Brazilian communities, and some recognized extractive reserves. These recognized extractive reserves are protected areas in Brazil that allow local communities to continue traditional Indigenous practices while ensuring the area is conserved. Basically, these are the areas that Indigenous traditions outride even the new Western environmental rulings, which is quite amazing that, you know, we are talking about such sensitive area in terms of Indigenous being and Indigenous and identity. And this is the time that that piece of information that I gave you in terms of context about the Convention 169 comes very, very handy, because that piece of, saving kind of, international convention requires free, prior, and informed consultation with indigenous population. And surprise, surprise, that has not happened. So there were no free, prior, and informed consultations, at least with some of the recognized indigenous groups. And people were surprised. They only learned about it via some investigative journalist work, not even official government releases. And then the other thing that really, for lack of a better word, pissed off the communities, was the fact that the maps that were released, the official maps and documentations that were released for at least one of the data centers that now is mostly known as a TikTok data center as part of a bigger smart port project, did not include some of the indigenous villages and those protected communities at all. And the argument is that this erasure is not just some technical details. It's a clear case of environmental racism, environmental injustice, denying people's presence, denying their history, denying their right to exist in a territory in an attempt to make them invisible. One that reinforces institutional violence and colonial practice. Unfortunately, these stories are not new to us here in Australia, but the biggest difference is that unlike Australia, Brazil is a signatory of that very important piece of international, basically, convention that protects the rights of indigenous people. And this brings me to my continuing journey in search of a South-to-South dialogue. As I'm hoping to build on the amazing network that I have managed to build in the last 12 months in Brazil, but also in South Africa, more than a couple of other places on the question of data centers. And I believe that while some of the narrations are not very far from the concerns raised even here in Australia, but they might allow us to think about and to go about even bigger conversations like the rights of the First Nation people. And I still cannot believe why Australia is not a signatory of that important convention as a first, world country. I don't have the answer to that question, but if anyone does, please let me know. My search for a South-to-South dialogue continues, and thank you for your patience on this journey with me.
Thank you, Tooran. It was nice to see the arc of your research, and especially where you're looking to take it now. I mean, the data center question and issue is so pertinent, so timely, and raising what feels like similar questions as we've explored in the past. You made reference to this is not a new story for the Australian context, but a different kind of set of technologies and material relationships. I was just going to jump on the question of consultation because I can't help myself, so I'm going to take chair's prerogative. You made reference a couple of times to the UN signatory and the convention in that Australia hasn't signed it. I'm sure, David, you'll have some insight into that, maybe or maybe not. You had like this visceral reaction to it at some point. But consultation isn't always the answer, right? Consultation of some kind can be useful, but it also sometimes feels too easy to make that gesture that somehow consultation, it would arrive at a different outcome. I write about gaslighting. Yeah, I know. Participation. So I was just interested to know your thoughts on that and to unpack that a little bit. Would being a signatory really matter? Would consultation really matter? And if so, how would it matter?
It's not a surprising question at all coming from you, Crystal.
Hmm.
What was interesting for me wasn't really about the notion of consultation or the power of consultation, but the background, the stories that some of my contacts and especially my academic collaborators shared with me about the success that they had in recent time, because Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, became a signatory around 2002. So in the last 20 years, they were actually talking about specific cases when they managed to put a stop on massive, otherwise approved mining projects. And the fact that they managed to make what is, for example, in the Australian context, even imaginable, possible. And my main point of raising this is the power and the sense of agency that I heard in the voices of the indigenous activists that spoke on the subject. So that sense of agency and that sense of trust and power in this specific convention is something that I am willing to learn more about. Mm-hmm. And as I said, these are all raw data. So there are areas that I need to go deeper, and definitely that is one of them. But they gave me a couple of specific cases when they were successful to turn things around. Mm-hmm. And they were hoping to use them as a precedent to follow and to keep the fight going with the data center, especially the TikTok one. So
the fact that it's a TikTok dedicated data center. Andrew online has a question.
Sure.
Andrew, I was wondering if you want to pop up and ask it, or maybe it was a long comment, but you wrote a fair bit. Are you still there?
Am I showing up now?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I was just, I mean,
I can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is it working now? My mic is on.
Can
you hear me
do you
now?
want to read the comment?
Andrew, we can't hear you for some reason. I'm sorry, but there's a long comment here. I might share it with you afterwards because it's quite long. But thank you. Any questions in the room?
Can you hear me now?
We'll go David, then Kim, or Kim. Yeah.
So you're encountering you're describing Brazil's government in one sort of aspect, and the kind of term that comes to mind immediately is state capture, right? There's obviously other actors there that are benefiting from this. And on that, have you ever heard the term power mapping?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. But the other thing is that there's other areas in which Brazil has really led the world. So for instance, in the aid response, in participatory budgeting and in unconditional cash transfers, where if you go to that stuff, look at Brazil, right? So I'm just wondering, in your understanding of the Brazilian state, how do these two faces manifest from the same entity, so to speak?
It's interesting that you said that, because my while I've been in touch with some of my collaborators for well over a year via Zoom and all of that, this was my very first time in Brazil. And my very first impression was how left they were. And I'm not just talking about academics who are accused of being left. I'm talking about ordinary people. I've said this to a few friends, that one of the things that amazed me was that quite a number of ordinary people that I came across in less than 5 minutes made a comment about Brazil being a racist country and the fact that we all are working on it. And I was like, wow, because the most racist people that I know are always the one that deny it. A society that owns that and a society that acknowledges that we still have a long way to go is laps ahead of, a society that is in denial. And then I was actually invited to a couple of workshops. One of them was on this question of participatory budgeting, and I had a very amazing experience using Google Translator. I was telling Chris this morning, and she asked me how it went, and I was like, the only problem is that I use more colorful language, is very sexist. I was like, whenever men spoke, it was translating like a machine, as it should. But then when women would open their mouth, it would go deaf. And for a few minutes, it wouldn't hear anything. And it wasn't because they were low, they were mumbling, nothing. It's just that this has been trained with male voices, so it was much better at picking up male voices. But they were more men, so as a result of that, I didn't miss a lot, but just the sexist pattern was really disturbing. So I was firsthand exposed to the different ways of doing things. It's too early for me to make any judgment, but it just captured my attention enough to want to learn more. It was very similar to the experience that I had there before in South Africa as a country and as a context that I just want to learn more and I want to go back to. And it just happened that both of these places are actually the hotbeds of data centers at this point of time. So I have good excuses to go back and learn about those larger societal patterns. Hopefully I'll be in a position to make more informed judgments, but all I can say is that it's really interesting that you also pointed out.
Okay, thanks.
Kim.
Yeah, well, thank you for your talk. It's really thought-provoking. At one level, this is sort of like, what else is new? Global corporation comes in, state offers tax-free havens to generate investment, overrides the local community. It's been going on for a long time, neoliberal liberalism in that sense. But my question really is about how will South-to-South dialogue help? Right? What's the argument that we do this because it will have these kind of goals or these kind of ends? Is it about unearthing local knowledge? Is it about some interaction between global and local? Is it about learning, building new knowledge? Is it about building collaborations and solidarity for collective action? Are there other? Where do you see? What do you? If you say let's have South-to-South collaboration, it's not for its own sake.
No, it's not for its own sake, but in a sense, it is all of the above and perhaps more. I've had a very good experience in terms of learning as a researcher. But one thing that motivated me to continue this search of South-to-South dialogue was when I could go beyond my own selfish reasoning and connect otherwise fragmented voices with each other. And I'm very proud of the moments that I could do that, because many of these civil society actors are struggling with limited sources, putting down fires on a daily basis, and really don't have the time, the space, the resources to identify and to connect with similar-minded forces elsewhere. So when I could identify these voices, these forces, and put them in contact with each other, I also think that that's a different level of going back to my original framework, politicizing, because allowing that organization, mobilization of forces that wouldn't have otherwise met. And this is the part that is less captured in academic impact, the way that it is measured these days. And sometimes it cannot even be made public, because in some of the cases that, for example, I came across in the smart city domain in India, and the data centers don't seem to be very different, is that there are ongoing court cases that are still open. And sometimes they can learn from each other's experiences. They can actually use each other's experiences as precedent, submit them even to the court. And as an academic coming from Global North, with the additional resources that I have, I really feel like that's some good that I could do. And that is part of the thing that I encourage even other colleagues.
Just a little follow-up. A lot of people talk about South-North dialogue as well, right? Is that a part of this? I mean, does it work without South-North dialogue?
Oh, I mean, first of all, as I said at the very beginning, I don't think that South is limited to the red parts of the map. If anything, Western Sydney might be South. You know, if anything, certain parts of Northern Territory, you know, they're South in terms of being sidelined, in terms of being silenced. Basically, whenever there is vulnerability, whenever yeah, maybe. So I don't think that these are foreign concepts. The main difference is that the intensity in the global South would expose a different level of possibilities, but also challenges. For me, it expedited my learning. Some of the things that might have taken much longer to pick up in Australian context, they're confronting in India.
Questions or comments from anyone else? I have a quick follow-up quickly on the first part of Kim's question about, you know, major corporations coming in and extracting from communities. What, because you're interrogating this through the smart city lens and digitization, how might that lens allow us to see those relationships differently?
I mean, first of all, data centers are new infrastructure, and the scale and intensity is very different from many of the earlier practices that we have seen. Their environmental footprints is just mind-blowing, and especially at this time, you know, with the unfolding of climate change, is really telling that. And the role that greenwashing, especially in the tech sector, because it's not everywhere that the greenwashing is part of the argument. Actually, quite a lot of data centers that I came across in the South African context don't even pretend, they don't even go for greenwashing. They're really all counting on fossil, fuel and nothing, no even pretense of greenwashing. So it's just, I feel like they're giving us another reason to review some of the unresolved arguments that we have had. And if anything, reinforce the need for continue our endeavors, because if we don't, things are going to only get worse.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna go Daniel first. We haven't heard from Daniel. Go for it, please.
Thank you.
The person from Brazil.
Yes.
I should have said that. Okay. The map was there. The flag was there.
Yeah, it was a very interesting topic for me because I'm Brazilian, but also because
Which part of Brazil?
Southeast.
Okay.
Yeah. But also I think because my research is around technology and space, so it's very in line with that. And I think it's kind of the natural trajectory for me as well. And I'm studying this a lot these days. So very interesting for me. And I think there are a lot of contradictions around data centers in Brazil as well, as you could see there. I think one of the things that were kind of on the public opinion and this dialogue that was having there was like the trade-offs of having these data centers, especially in terms of data sovereignty. So I think one of the arguments from the government and some of the stakeholders there was that bringing data centers to Brazil would protect sensitive data from the government, sensitive data from Brazilian sources. So I think there is also an interest in the part of the government to regulate this, to kind of administer their data, how they're producing data and storing this data. So I think there are a lot of contradictions in there, at the same time that they feel the need to regulate how they will also invite different voices to regulate this. And then I'm not sure whether they see this as positive or negative externalities. It depends where you'll be talking about, right? So I think I would have other questions, but I'll focus on this one. I didn't see, I don't know if you talked to any public agents and to see their views on this as well, how they're contrasting with these other opinions, whether they are considering these opinions as well, and how they are articulating this with this idea of data sovereignty.
One of the things that I'm really excited about is how much data I have on Brazil. While there's not a lot in English language or even in English academic publication, there's a lot of material in Portuguese, and I've been very busy translating a lot of the stuff using some of the AI platforms. So I have a lot, and I had to be very selective today. There is an argument around data sovereignty, even as part of the new policies that they have ratified. There is a reference to data sovereignty. In saying so, they have put a very dismal percentage, if I remember correctly, something about 10%, and even that is suggestion, it's not a requirement, and there is no mechanism around accountability. And the other thing is that the way that data centers operate, there are always big questions about accountability. For example, and this is something that I knew even before I went to Brazil. If you remember, a few years ago, Australian government passed this law around national security. And even universities were impacted. They were like, you are only allowed to work with major platforms that save your data on Australian land. And that was actually the very first push towards building the first generation of data centers in Australia before they become cool and popular and problematic as a result of that. Because Microsoft was one of the very first basically players that got into that. And that's part of the reason that most of our universities work with Microsoft, because government and universities were not allowed to work with platforms that didn't have a base in Australia. And even back then, there were immediate questions raised about, okay, they have a building here, but do you know if they are storing our data here? We don't know. If anything, one of the ways that these cloud-based basically operators guarantee the safety of your data is that they always save your data in more than one location. And you cannot easily tell if your data is saved here or across the ocean. So that's one thing that even looms around all of the data sovereignty claims anywhere around the world, let alone that the percentage and the number that Brazilian government has put forward right now is really dismal. So not a big part of the occasion. The other thing which has frustrated many of the people that I came across in my trip was the secrecy. And the fact that the government is not willing to talk about, and if anything, they're really frustrated with the high quality, very impressive, couldn't even believe what I saw, investigative journalism that even unraveled some of these stories. It was only a few months ago that basically some journalists started, and they have been persistently releasing new information on this on the subject. In most cases, government reaction is denial. And that's part of the reason that in my very first trip, I didn't approach them because
Mm.
there were a lot of people who would even show me documents, letters of them communicating, them asking for information and either silence or just telling them that details are not sorted, details are not. So it's just, as I said, it's a lot, and I am I'm just sharing raw data. It's not figured out, but it's just something that for me is exciting and encouraging enough to want to learn more. And I know that you want to wrap it up.
We've got 3 minutes
Yes.
and we have 2 questions.
Oh, okay.
Maybe go with that then.
Okay, maybe we'll collect the questions really quickly and you can
Okay.
sum them up.
My question is that we are looking from the global south perspective, the countries which are receiving these big data from infrastructure. So my question is that do they have any location choice preferences? For example, the enterprises which are coming from the north, do they look for some kind of political stability, the human resources, the tax relaxations, the environmental relaxation policies? Like we use the term pollution halo and pollution heaven hypothesis, that where they find the relaxed environmental policies, that enterprises go there. So do they have, is there any location choice preferences for these enterprises?
Yes, definitely these tax exemptions are playing a role. Another thing that I have to say, and I'm going to just quickly say this, is that one of the things that I learned about data centers is that their hard infrastructure need to be recycled very frequently. So data centers are basically active factories of e-waste. So they also need to find locations that e-waste can be disposed easily and cheaply. That's part of the reason that they're moving out of Europe.
And also cold climate, right?
I mean, cold climate does help, but they need, regardless of climate, they need water, they need enormous amount of water to cool. So the usual climate outdoor is not going to be ever enough to provide the sort of cooling that they need.
And one more thing, just adding, for example, if they want to build in China, so they have their own data. They do not allow Facebook or YouTube in their country. So
They're not going to China. China has a lot of data centers, but that is because of China's data. So they're not going to go to China or Russia anytime soon.
So Tooran, you have entertained us on a fascinating topic, which personally I haven't put a lot of thought into. Data centers, insofar as, just everyday chat with friends, horrified about what's happening. But it was also a treat to see where you've taken the future fellowship and where you're going to go next. So thank you for such a thought-provoking presentation. We'll do the clapping bit in a second, but before I do that, I just want to say, as is our practice, we always go to the Clyde afterwards. So if anyone likes to continue the conversation, please come along and have a beverage with us. Thanks everyone online, and please join me in thanking Tooran.